They say when death comes, you don't get a second chance. But for some people, that rule was broken. These are real people, real moments, and real stories where death was just seconds away, and somehow they escaped. Not because of superpowers, not because of luck alone, but because of one tiny decision, one random coincidence, or one unbelievable twist of fate that changed everything. Our first story begins with a man named Harrison Okene, a cook working on a tugboat in the Atlantic Ocean. In 2013, the boat was hit by a massive wave during a storm and suddenly capsized. In less than a minute, the entire ship flipped upside down and sank to the bottom of the ocean, nearly 100 feet deep. Inside, everything went dark. The water rushed in, the lights went out, and almost everyone on board drowned within moments. Harrison was in the bathroom when it happened. He felt the ship tilt, then violently shake, and before he could even understand what was happening, he was thrown against the wall and trapped underwater. He tried to swim, but the current was too strong. He couldn't see anything. He couldn't tell which way was up. His lungs were burning, and he was sure this was the end. But then, something impossible happened. Harrison found a small air pocket inside the wreck, just enough space for him to lift his head and breathe. Around him were dead bodies floating in the dark. The water was freezing cold. He had no food, no fresh water, no light, and no way to escape. He was officially declared dead. Harrison stayed trapped inside that air pocket for 3 full days, 72 hours at the bottom of the ocean. He survived by floating in the same position, barely moving, trying not to panic, breathing slowly to save oxygen. He drank salt water mixed with oil from the ship just to keep his throat wet. He heard strange noises from outside, metal cracking, and sometimes complete silence that made him think no one was ever coming. On the third day, something even more terrifying happened. A team of deep-sea divers came to recover the bodies. One diver reached into the darkness with his hand, and Harrison grabbed it. The diver almost had a heart attack. He thought he had just touched a corpse, but it was a living human hand. Harrison was pulled out alive after being underwater for 3 days, something doctors said should have been biologically impossible. He had survived a situation where survival was not supposed to exist, and the scariest part, Harrison later said the most painful thing wasn't the cold, or the hunger, or even the fear of drowning. It was the moment he accepted that he was already dead, and then realized he wasn't. Our next story takes us to the skies, where survival often depends on seconds and split-second decisions. In 1972, a Uruguayan rugby team was flying over the Andes Mountains when their plane crashed into a snow-covered peak. The cold was brutal, the wind relentless, and the altitude so high that oxygen was scarce. Most passengers didn't survive the initial impact. Those who did faced freezing temperatures, snowstorms, and a landscape so barren it seemed like death itself had claimed that mountain forever. Among the survivors was Fernando Parrado, a young man who had lost friends and teammates in the crash. For days they huddled together, using the plane wreckage as shelter, but the cold was unbearable and food was nearly non-existent. They tried to eat what little supplies remained, but soon they were forced to make an unthinkable choice. Trapped with no rescue in sight and facing certain death, they decided to survive by eating the flesh of those who had already perished in the crash. It's a story that shocks the conscience, yet it was the only way to live. After more than 2 weeks of waiting in vain for rescue, Fernando and another survivor, Roberto Canessa, made the courageous decision to climb out of the wreckage and traverse the treacherous Andes Mountains. They had almost no equipment, just thin jackets, some chocolate, and sheer willpower. For 10 days, they walked through freezing winds, deep snow, and jagged cliffs. Each step could have been their last, but on the 10th day, they encountered a local Chilean shepherd who called for help. Thanks to their determination and refusal to give in to despair, the remaining 14 survivors were rescued. What made this story even more incredible was not just that they survived, but how they survived. Every day, every decision, every struggle mattered. They faced death repeatedly and stared it in the face, yet they never let it win. And these stories share a common thread. It's never over until it's over. Harrison Okene in the ocean, Fernando Parrado in the Andes, both had moments where they thought life had ended, yet somehow fate had other plans. It's a chilling reminder that survival is not always about strength, it's about endurance, mental resilience, and sometimes sheer impossibility. Now, imagine Imagine being seconds away from death, not in the ocean, not on a mountain, but on solid ground, and still somehow surviving against all odds. This next story is about Miracle Michael, a man who survived a lightning strike in a way that doctors called medically impossible. Michael was hiking alone in a remote forest when a sudden thunderstorm rolled in. The sky darkened, the wind picked up, and before he could find shelter, a bolt of lightning struck directly through a tree he was standing beside. The force threw him several feet back, and he hit the ground hard. His heart stopped instantly. His body was burned, his clothes shredded, and everything around him smelled of ozone. Anyone who witnessed it would have assumed he was dead. But what makes Michael's story remarkable is that after several minutes of being clinically dead, his body somehow restarted on its own. His heart began beating again, and he slowly regained consciousness. Medics later explained that the electric current somehow reset his heart rhythm, an extremely rare phenomenon, but what saved him from permanent brain damage was his position when struck. The way he fell and the small tree branch that partially diverted the electricity may have been the only reason he survived. Michael spent weeks in the hospital, recovering from burns, nerve damage, and a heart that had briefly stopped, but the mental impact of facing death so closely haunted him more than the physical injuries. He often said that during those terrifying seconds, he felt like life itself paused, as if he was staring into the void, and the void blinked first. That kind of survival isn't just luck, it's a reminder of how fragile yet astonishing human life can be. These stories, from the ocean floor to icy mountains to the sheer force of lightning, show one thing clearly: death is not always final, and survival is not always predictable. Some people defy it in ways that seem impossible, and their experiences leave us questioning what we truly know about life, fate, and human resilience. Next, we turn to a story that takes survival to the edge of sheer physical chaos, a story of a man who should have died in an instant but didn't. In 2007, Vesna Vulovic, a flight attendant on a commercial airliner, experienced one of the most unbelievable escapes from death ever recorded. Her plane was flying over Czechoslovakia when a bomb exploded mid-air, tearing the aircraft apart at 33,000 feet. Most of the passengers were killed instantly. The fuselage broke apart and everyone plummeted toward the ground. Vesna was trapped inside a section of the plane that detached from the rest of the wreckage. Somehow, her seat was wedged against the fuselage wall, and she was surrounded by debris that acted as a protective barrier. When she hit the snowy mountains below, the impact should have been fatal. Yet, against all odds, she survived. She suffered multiple fractures, a crushed skull, and a temporarily paralyzed body, but she walked away from a fall of over 33,000 feet. Doctors and investigators called it a miracle, saying there was no other reasonable explanation. Vesna's recovery was long and grueling. She spent months in hospitals, underwent numerous surgeries, and faced intense physical therapy. But even more remarkable than her physical survival was her mental resilience. Instead of succumbing to fear or trauma, she returned to work years later, speaking publicly about her experience and inspiring countless people with the story of how life can cling to you, even in moments of absolute impossibility. Another equally chilling story comes from New York City, where a construction worker named Patrick De La Rosa fell from the 20th floor of a skyscraper while performing maintenance. He plunged through scaffolding, missing solid floors by mere inches, and landed in a pile of construction debris. When coworkers reached him, he was conscious but badly injured. Doctors later said that the combination of falling through weak scaffolding and landing on loose materials likely saved his life by slowing the impact just enough to prevent instant death. Patrick called it the luckiest accident anyone could ever have. These stories share a haunting commonality. Every second, every small detail, every fragment of chance mattered, from the icy Andes to the depths of the ocean, from the violent strike of lightning to mid-air explosions and free falls. Survival isn't always about skill or preparation. It's about defying odds that seem insurmountable. And each of these people, in their own terrifying way, stared at death and stepped back. Now let's explore the terrifying power of nature and how some people have stared death in the face and lived to tell the tale. In 2004, a tsunami struck the Indian Ocean, one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. Millions were caught off guard by the massive waves, with entire towns wiped out in minutes. Among the survivors was Haji Muhammad, a fisherman from Aceh, Indonesia. Haji had been out at sea when the first warning signs appeared. The water suddenly receded far beyond the shoreline. Sensing danger, he tried to head back to shore, but the waves were already building, growing taller and faster than any he had ever seen. When the tsunami hit, it slammed his small boat against rocks, overturned it, and tossed him into debris-filled waters. He was battered, thrown underwater repeatedly, and pummeled by floating wreckage. Most people in his village didn't survive. Haji clung to a tree trunk for hours, drifting along with the currents, barely able to breathe. He recalls thinking every second that he was going to die, yet somehow the waters carried him toward higher ground. After surviving the night, he found himself on a small patch of land with a few other survivors, completely exhausted but alive. His story is one of countless accounts from that tsunami, where sheer instinct and the unpredictable currents of nature dictated life or death. Another story of survival comes from extreme car accidents, where reflexes, chance, and physics collide in life-saving ways. In 2012, Alex Smith, a young man from California, lost his car on a mountainous road. The vehicle skidded off the edge, plummeting over 200 feet down a rocky cliff. Miraculously, Alex landed in a dense patch of shrubs that cushioned his fall. His car was destroyed, but he survived. With broken bones and a concussion, rescuers said that without the precise angle of impact and the shrub's placement, Alex would have died instantly. What ties all these stories together? Harrison trapped in the ocean, Fernando crossing the Andes, Michael struck by lightning, Vesna falling from a plane, Patrick free-falling from a skyscraper, and Haji surviving a tsunami is a chilling truth. Death often comes without warning, but survival can hinge on the tiniest sliver of chance. These near-death experiences are reminders that life is unpredictable, fragile, and sometimes utterly miraculous.